This session will focus on performance-related pay. My name is Amy Humphries. I am a Senior Lecturer in Human Resource Management at the University of West England. If you have any questions or queries about any of the content relating to this topic, please do not hesitate to contact me by email. Performance-related pay is very much what it sounds like. It is the linking of a proportion of pay to performance. This proportion of pay can range from 1% up to 100%. However, in the UK, to ensure minimum and living wage standards are adhered to, it is unlikely that 100% of pay is performance-driven. Usually, it is the organisation that sets the proportion of pay that will be linked to performance. However, in some occupations, employees are given control over their pay composition. Estate agents are a very good example of this. Some agents choose to have a very high percentage of their pay to be commission-based, whereas others choose a very low percent. This decision is often led by an individual's aversion to risk and, of course, personal circumstances. The measure of performance can be individual, group, or organisational level. Commission is a very good example of individual measured-based performance. An example of group performance is the rewarding of branches of stores who perform best in a region or area. Organisationally measured performance is, more often than not, recorded annually and can take the following into account: sales, market growth, and share price. A company well recognised for this type of reward is John Lewis. John Lewis shares their profit between all their employees at their year end. The amount each employee receives is dependent not on their own individual performance, but on their pay grade and level within the organisation. The aim of this session is to look at why it is often very important to link pay to performance. To do this, we will first look at the theoretical underpinning of performance-related pay. Second, the benefits and drawbacks of performance-related pay will be discussed. Lastly, the suitability of PRP will be examined with reference to some case study occupations. One of the strongest theoretical justifications for PRP is that of agency theory. Agency theory, established by Ross and Mitnick, outlines the importance of aligning the interests of employees and employers. The premise is that when interests are aligned, the optimum performance of individuals and the organisation will be achieved. However, typically the assumption is that these two groups want different things. Employees would ideally like to receive vast amounts of rewards, but would ideally like to ensure that they are not over-exerting themselves to receive these rewards. On the other hand, employers want to get the highest returns possible. So ideally, they would want the highest possible productivity without having to reward too extensively. So can we use rewards to remedy this situation? In short, quite possibly. Through linking pay to performance, employees are incentivized to increase their productivity, as this will increase their reward. As they are being rewarded for their productivity, they are compensated for all they produce, and of course their effort. Employers see productivity rise. Importantly, as they are paying for performance, they will not overpay. Instead, they are only providing compensation for work they will make a profit on. In this case, parties find their interests aligned. Both benefit from increased productivity, and neither party is overexerting what they do not have. However, performance-related pay is not a practice without potential drawbacks. Sometimes output is beyond employees' control. For instance, in a factory that uses a lot of machinery, if an employee operates a machine to produce a good and the machine breaks, their productivity is very low, not because they are not willing, but because of factors outside of their control. It may also be the case that performance-related pay induces bad behaviour, or behaviour that is not desired by the organisation. For example, if an employee sets out a PRP policy that states they will pay for each unit produced, Employees may produce very poor quality units in order to finish as many as possible. Poor quality is not what the employer desires, but it is what they have incentivized by not providing enough detail in their policy. A further issue is that we may see friction between employees. If a minority of employees are performing at a very high level, they may force the overall productivity boundaries to be raised. And as such, the majority of employees now find themselves having to work much harder in order to receive the same rewards as they did before. Lastly, if performance-related pay accounts for too much of the employee's reward, they may not be guaranteed to earn at least the minimum wage. This is a legal requirement and may mean that the organisation would be better to pay a minimum hourly rate with PRP in addition. Two academic case studies that focus on performance-related pay are that of Safelite and the Inland Revenue. In the Safelite case by Lazier, windscreen fitters were the focus of the research. Two very similar organisations were involved in the study. Both paid their workers initially by basic wage, and then one organisation changed to incorporate performance-related pay. The study found that performance of workers in Safelite, the PRP organisation, performance increased, and so did the quality of work. Furthermore, there appeared to be a sorting effect, whereby the worst employees left the organisation, and because of the PRP policy, they attracted good workers to replace them. This is because if you are bad at your job, it is likely that you would have to work very, very hard in order to earn what you did on basic pay. Whereas if you are very good at your job, your high productivity attracts you to organisations where this is rewarded. In the Inland Revenue, however, PRP was not found to be successful. Employees were not satisfied with the system that they thought to be arbitrary and not reflective of their complex jobs. The study, conducted by Marsden et al., concluded that PRP can be effective, but when performance is difficult to measure and jobs do not produce a standardised output, PRP may in fact have negative outputs. Therefore, whilst PRP can have clear benefits, not all jobs are suited to this approach. Occupational, industry and market characteristics should all be taken into account before any organisation chooses to implement performance-related pay. The nature of the job is a key factor when considering whether or not to pay by performance. Cost of monitoring is a key component of this. Only if it is easy and cheap to measure the cost of output should PRP be implemented. Additionally, thought should be given to the levels of control, team production, and how labour-intensive work is. Only when an individual has a substantial degree of control over their work and subsequent output should their performance be rewarded. Similarly, only when the job is labour-intensive as opposed to machine should PRP be implemented. This is because we want to reward an employee's effort and not the ability of technology. With regard to the task, only when the tasks are easy to quantify and measure should they be used to measure performance. As with the case of Inland Revenue, when tasks are complex and not repetitive, PRP can be very ineffective and in fact demotivating. Labour and product market characteristics are also very important to consider. Remember the sorting effect that occurred in Safelite. When wages and competition are high in alternative firms, PRP will be particularly effective because good workers will be attracted as they are seeking high rewards. Rather logically, PRP will be most effective amongst employees who are comfortable with risk and variable pay. If your employees do not like risk, they will not be comfortable with this varying amounts of reward, especially when they do not have complete control over their own output. It must be the case that increased effort leads to increased performance and therefore pay. If effort is not linked to performance, PRP will be ineffective because employees will not be incentivized to increase their own effort. It is also worth noting that unions have been traditionally heavily opposed to PRP, particularly at the individual level. This is, in part, because of the conflict with collectivism. Where employees are represented by a union, the potential benefits from PRP may be outweighed by the friction with the union. The easiest way to think about these job and market characteristics is to consider case study occupations. Considering the following occupations, teachers, doctors, delivery drivers and investment bankers, which, if any, are a good case for PRP? For teachers, one potential performance measure that is often proposed is the value added for their pupils. This is the extent to which pupils meet and exceed their predicted grades. So the assumption is that if they meet or exceed these predicted grades, then the teacher is performing very well. What are the problems? Well, teaching is a team effort. If I, for example, teach religious education and my students do really well, it might be because I'm an amazing teacher, but it might also be because they have a great English teacher who has increased their ability to write a persuasive essay. Also, teachers have limited control over the composition and behaviour of their students. So it might be argued that it is unfair to pay teachers like this. It also might be argued that teachers may end up avoiding teaching struggling or underperforming students, as this would harm their pay. This sort of behaviour is not what we desire, especially in the public sector. Doctors? Well, the proposition was that doctors, more specifically surgeons, should be rewarded for low mortality rates in theatre. This makes sense, we all want to survive surgery. But the main issue here is that it may mean that surgeons avoid operating on complex cases, or the very young or very old, because all of these groups have an increased chance of not surviving surgery. This is clearly not the desired behaviour we want. The proposition often with delivery drivers is that we should reward the number of on-time deliveries. This is very easy to monitor, it's easy to count and record, and it's very transparent. There are problems, as many factors are outside of the delivery driver's control. For example, traffic, weather, location, and so on. And speed may incentivize dangerous driving. However, compared to doctors and teachers, arguably this occupation is much more suited to performance-related pay, because of the standardised work and the ease in measuring the output. And of course, the ease at which we can monitor work through GPS systems. Lastly, investment bankers. Now, often it is argued that investment bankers should work on commission on profit contributions. We have seen huge problems with this approach, unethical behaviour, for example. Added to this, that there are many factors outside of their control, such as economic risk, market trends, and so on. However, this is still the common practice within this sector and industry. What we have seen to try and compensate for the poor behaviour incentivised is a new regulatory body. So when thinking about performance-related pay in your organisation, if you decide to implement PRP, there are some key questions that need to be answered. How can or should performance be measured? What can be measured? Who will monitor it? And who decides the level of pay? And of course, you should always take a moment to consider if any policy will inadvertently incentivize bad behavior.